Yeah, I would like to talk about the Black Hawk Down. So it was in October today in 1993. And so a couple of months prior, we had a huge JSOC exercise at Fort Bliss, Texas, in El Paso. And so all of the Rangers, all of the other special mission units, all of the helicopter units were out there, all the fixed wing units, just a huge exercise. In the middle of the exercise, they had an alert, and a large portion of the force said, hey, we need you to go back home. You're going to get alerted to go to Somalia to kind of sort things out there. And if you go back and look at the history there, we intervened to provide humanitarian assistance to a starving population and helping the UN bring food in to feed a famine-riddled population. Over time, there are people there, these warlords, who were politically empowered by if they could hand out the food rather than us handing out the food. And so they were intercepting these food shipments, and we said, hey, we need to get these folks out of here. So that's when they activated. So we were on exercise in El Paso. All of a sudden, the next day, a bunch of them leave and go home. And we didn't see them again. And on October 3rd of 1993, I was stationed at Hurlburt Field, Florida. And our squadron commander said, hey, I need to call everybody in. We have a commander's call. He brought us all in a room like this and said, hey, just so you know, we've got a tough fight going on in Somalia right now. And he kind of outlined at that point, they were about 10 hours into it, about what was happening on the ground there. And it was just tragic because we knew all these folks. And as Joe said, just some tremendous personal courage and selflessness there that kind of set the standard for the JSOC community. And we stand on the shoulders of those who are who fought there. But I appreciate, Joe, appreciate you bringing that up. It's a big day.
So Scott, the number we've all been thinking about, 1.47. What is the significance of 1.47? And also, why did you decide to go into service? Why did you decide to go to the academy and serve our country for? I
try not to focus on the 1.47, but thank you for bringing that up. So I grew up in Kentucky, in a very small town, probably 3,000 people in the entire county. I went to school from kindergarten through 12th grade with the same kids. Did very well in school, good athletically, involved in the church. I was a big fish in a small pond there. And my junior year in high school, I received a football kind of recruiting letter from the Air Force Academy. I had no idea what the Air Force Academy was. We had no military affiliation. I didn't understand it. But my dad was smart enough to know, hey, that's free. You need to apply and pursue that. So I did. I pursued it, and I didn't end up making the football team. I got cut during the tryouts. But I was at the Air Force Academy. Things were doing well. So at military academies, and I'm sure it's the same for all my other military academy colleagues in here, they want to build the whole person. And so when you talk about the whole person, you want the military side, you want the professionalism we expect from our military members, you want a strong academic, intellectual curiosity, you want to build that. You want to build the spiritual side, you want to have, there's something in your core that's going to sustain you, and the athletic side. And so what they do is they give you way too many things to do, and it's an exercise in prioritization. The first semester there, first year there particularly. So having not grown up every day on a farm and getting yelled at from waking up to going to bed, I said, I need to focus a little more on the military side. So I did. And at the end of my first semester, my shoes were impeccable. You could hold your hand over them and see, it's like a mirror. You could see all your fingers. My belt buckle, incredible. Not a stain on my uniform. Everything was perfectly lined up. Athletically, I was doing fine. Spiritually, I was doing fine. Academically, I thought, hey, things are going good. I always tend to pull it out when the exam's on the line. I'll be okay here. And so then you leave home for your first Christmas break. When I come back after Christmas break, in my room there, they have your report card sitting on your desk. And I was surprised to find I had a 1.47 grade point average after my first semester. So I immediately, this is back in the payphone days, I immediately got out in the hall, walked straight down the hall to the phone bank, the payphone bank, called my dad, said, they're kicking me out. Please enroll me somewhere. I'll probably be home in a couple of weeks here. This experiment is over. Start talking to schools, which he did. So that was my inauspicious beginning.
That's crazy. From 1.47 to the best of the best. So talk about then, somewhere along the line, you didn't know anything else. You know F-16 from F-14 back then. But then somehow you got into helicopters and kind of talk about that transition into that interest. So again, when you go out to the Air Force Academy, a lot of people come there, they want to fly. They grew up in a military family. They really wanted to fly. This was the best way to go. I didn't want to. I wanted it for the education. It was a free education. And I had no intention of flying. I had no intention of making a career out of it. And I remember early,
they're kind of showing us this motivational slideshow of all these airplanes, and guys are going F-16, B-52, B-1. I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff. I'm never going to cut it here. But every summer, they would send us off to an Air Force base for 2 to 3 weeks to kind of give us a break and to let us know, hey, it's not always going to be like this. There is life after the Air Force Academy. And so in 1985, I went to Hurlburt Field, Florida, in Fort Walton Beach, which is the home of all of Air Force Special Operations, and spent 3 weeks there flying on helicopters, flying on AC-130 gunships, hanging out with our special tactics personnel, and I loved it. And I came back and say, this is what I want to do. I want to fly helicopters. And so I come back to the academy. I tell my chain of command there, I think I found my calling here. I want to fly helicopters. They're like, stop. You do not want to fly helicopters. And they said, if you describe the Air Force as a target, the center of the target here is like a fighter or a bomber. You're putting steel on target. You're taking it to the enemy. The helicopter is kind of off there in the periphery. It's like a corollary effort. We don't appreciate it. You won't get promoted. It's just not we just don't care about helicopters. And I said, well, I don't care. I don't plan on making it a career anyway. And I'd rather enjoy my day-to-day life while I'm serving, and I'll bloom more where I'm planted. If you plant me somewhere where I'm passionate about. And so they acquiesced and sent me to helicopters, and the rest is history. But I loved it. So that's the piece out there, I guess, is don't listen to naysayers. Kind of, if people are telling you you don't want to do this, if your passion is there, pursue it. So.
And Scott, as you know, my husband has served as a U.S. Navy SEAL, and in the special ops community, we often talk about mastering the basics in order to become proficient at your craft. How have you thought about that? What are your thoughts on that?
We think about it all the time. So in the military vernacular, we talk about shoot, move, communicate. And if you look at the way the force shoots, moves, and communicates over time, the shooting is pretty good and very good. And I'd say from the JSOC perspective, we have the best shooters in the world. But the equipment they're using is still your basic rifle, basic weapon. When you look at how we move, that's changed a lot. We move faster, different types of airframes, different types of vehicles. When you look at how we communicate, that has gotten more and more complex. When you talk about everything out there in the electromagnetic spectrum, how do we navigate it? How do we talk to others? How do we maintain situational awareness? So that has been a huge increase over the past 20 years or so. And JSOC is asked to do some very, very complex tasks and very complex missions. But when you look at them and you break them down, you can break them down into basic steps. And that was when I first got involved in special operations, that's what we focused on, get the basics down. And if you get the basics down of flying a helicopter and being able to put it precisely in the position where the ground team wants you to go and point the tail right where they want them to go, and then you do that at night, and then you do it in very, very reduced visibility and very, very poor weather, and then you do it with people shooting at you, that raises the complexity level. And so, but you learn those basics. And it was telling to me when I would go out and run the obstacle course with some of our special mission units at Fort Bragg, and just watch the way they approach the obstacle course. Obstacle courses are, a pretty common thing for the military, but these guys approach it every time. How can I improve this? How about if I put my left hand here on this obstacle instead of my right hand? What if I lead with my left foot? How can I shave off 1/10 of a second here on this obstacle, which will accumulate over the course and maybe save me 3 or 4 seconds? Seconds and minutes make a difference in combat. And so it was amazing to me to watch our force in action, pulling off some heroic missions, but it's a series of basic tasks they string together like nobody else can do. So again, mastering the basics should be the key for any discipline in which you're involved in.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue. I mean, we've been working with me on investing for the last 2 years now, and you talk about de-risking risk. Obviously, what you used to do was the highest risk endeavor. Investing has risk on a different order, but the same approach to like planning and detail. Talk about how that translates.
My view of the special operations community before I got into it, I'm like, hey, these guys are hanging it out there every night, just taking huge risk, probably invading countries I've never heard of all the time, and nobody knows about it. But when I got there and started to work with the force, it's not that way at all. We never entered a mission with our fingers crossed. We were never, concerned about, can we get lucky tonight? We knew what was going to happen. We built the plan, and we call it the base plan. Here's the plan we want to execute. And then you start going through contingencies. What happens if we lose a helicopter here? What happens if 2 helicopters break? What if they break en route and you have to land? What happens if The enemy comes here, they respond at a different time with more firepower than we prepared for. And we walk through that ad nauseum to an exhaustive level, and then we do what we call a rock drill, which is a rehearsal of concept. And you will lay out, we'll build a model here on the ground, and you walk through it, and you'd say, I'm flying this helicopter, here's where I'm gonna come in and land, and everybody knows exactly what you're gonna do. And again, when things go wrong on a target, and they always do, you're ready for it and you're prepared. So there's a ton of risk, but again, it's the basics and considering that risk before you launch that makes this team successful.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, how has the special ops community and how operations are conducted, how has that changed over the last several years, especially over the course of the war?
Yeah, so big change. So, for after 9/11, that was kind of the heyday of special operations. We were called and asked to do a lot of things, and we did do a lot of things and worked pretty hard. But there are some things we call the soft truths. Here's some of the hard principles of special operations forces. Number one is humans are more important than hardware. It's not about the equipment, it's about the person operating the equipment and making sure they've been through the right screening, they have the level of grit we want and the level of leadership. And number two is quality is more important than quantity. This is not something you can mass produce, and you can't produce them after emergencies occur. So after 9/11, the demand on the force was high. We didn't want to lower the standards because that's what makes us special. And so we started working harder and harder and harder. But it was a huge demand of force. We asked a lot of our people. Now we're changing again. It's less counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. It's more about what do we do against some of our more sophisticated adversaries. And there's a role for SOF in there as well. But we're always adapting, trying to be the most effective and most valuable for the nations we can be.
Yeah, so it's a good transition to kind of we talk about the changing nature of modern warfare. And I think there's some really interesting story arcs you tell that are really interesting.
Yeah. So again, same class as Joe. I'm not sure how it was at West Point, but every semester in our book issue at the Air Force Academy, we had a book called Soviet Military Power that was in our things. And we would look through it and all the equipment and how the Soviets were organized. That was the place we were going to fight. And one of my first assignments, they said, if we go to war against the Soviets, here's where you'll be fighting from. Your helicopters will be brought into this port. You're going to be flying out of here, and you studied it all. And we studied the enemy intently. And back then, the enemy was very easy to find. We knew exactly where they were, but they were hard to kill. And the special operations and the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism, the enemy's very easy to kill, but very, very hard to find. They're not wearing uniforms. They meld in. They're not. They hide well. They get support of the local populace in some areas. So that was a big, difficult change. Now, as you kind of see the way we talk about warfare now, it's kind of the pendulum is swinging back to a more traditional adversary in uniforms, that sort of thing. So that's changing. Another thing I would say was, when I was young, we were always lost. If you're on the ground, you're lost, and if you're flying, you're lost. And you always, you have this map book. You're trying to piece it all together in the middle of a mission, and of course, it always happens at the intersection of 4 map sheets, and you can't get them all together, and that's where you need to go, and it's just so frustrating. And then with GPS and the inertial navigation systems, after a while, you were never lost. I knew exactly where I was all the time. I could put you in the back of my helicopter precisely where you wanted to go at precisely the time you wanted to get there. And so that was a big change. And then that's changing now too. The electromagnetic spectrum is more congested. Our Russian counterparts in Syria have erected a jammer they've had on for a long time, ostensibly to keep drones away from their camps. It also jams GPS. And so again, the pendulum has swung back on how that's going. And then lastly, I would say, in my career, and we still continue to struggle to do this effectively, is to fight as a joint team. And that means merging the maritime, the land, and the air into a cohesive fighting force. And we've done very good at it. We always have lessons to learn, but now we're bringing in the space and cyber domain. And getting all that, we talk about setting the theater. If we're gonna go do an operation somewhere, I wanna make sure logistically we're set up, make sure we have the right forces in the right place, but I wanna be set in the cyber domain as well. And so what does that look like? How do we get set in the space domain? So we are thinking through that, and it'll probably be folks like you who help us, who will figure that out for us, but that's some of the challenges and changes I've seen.
Mm-hmm. And Scott, could you talk a little bit more about that in terms of traditionally when we thought about service, it was joining the military, working in government, and nowadays, especially because we're not in active war, recruitment numbers are down. How can all of us in this room today, instead of the traditional form of service like you did, how can we contribute to national security, innovation? What are your thoughts on that?
Great point. And that's one of the reasons I've joined Paul and the General Catalyst team. We talk a lot about global resilience. And for the United States to remain strong, it's more than the military. All of our systems in the United States, our infrastructure, our supply chains need to be protected, and we need to fortify those. And that is not going to be done by military people. First of all, we're not as innovative and fast as we'd like to be because of the bureaucratic nature of the military. So we're looking to industry, we're looking to private sector, we're looking to folks like you to help us figure out those problems and how to get after them in a smart way. You know, when I was the commander of JSOC, we were given a little bit of license to kind of pursue technology that maybe wasn't quite mature. And I loved it because, my job was to make it an unfair fight. And if I can give a person a piece of technology that will help them out on the battlefield or maybe even prevent us from putting somebody in harm's way, all the better. So I think with the tech that you all are seeing out there that's emerging every day, we can make it even more and more of an unfair fight. So I think that partnership is going to be crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a kind of nice segue to our last piece, which is kind of like leadership lessons from SOF, Special Operations Forces, to entrepreneurship, company building, and some of those topics. Maybe just think back, in your mid-career, what were some of the things that kind of helped you get to that level of excellence, right? And I think you talk a lot about kind of embracing the grind. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for you?
Yeah, so it's, again, you have to get reps and sets. And so when I first got into special operations, I was asked to do things with a helicopter I hadn't been doing before, like air refueling. And if it's intimidating when you're flying a big helicopter, and if you played Call of Duty, the paved, the helicopter I flew is in Call of Duty.
What's the prayer? What was the prayer? What would you guys say?
Yeah, it's called the paved prayer. Please God, don't let me screw this up. And when I first got into special operations, it was intoxicating because the people that I got to work with were the best I'd ever worked with in my entire life. And you don't want to be the one found wanting. You want to be the guy who you look to your left and right, and those guys are on it. And I wanted to be that guy too. And so you work at it all the time, perfecting your craft. And for me, it was, I'll volunteer, I'll do anything. You need a short notice deployment to Bosnia, I'm your guy. You need somebody to go to Kuwait, I'm your guy. You need somebody to fly on the weekends, I'm your guy. And you have to embrace the grind because you learn so much in that grind day to day that you don't realize until years looking back. And I'll say even for the Joint Special Operations Command, our reputation is not built on those days when they pull off really complex missions. It's on the days when nothing's going on. And you bring a sense of urgency to your work every day, even when it's boring. That's how you build a strong team and a strong culture that I think all you will want to do as well.
Mm-hmm. And what are some other lessons that you would impart upon, especially the founders in the room today, based on your experiences in the military as we're thinking about building companies?
One is embrace the grind, like Paul said. You're going to learn a ton. Two is think about culture. Think about culture and your personnel. I spent more time as the commander of JSOC talking about culture and values than I thought was necessary. And so just for an example, 3 times a week, we had a secure, classified Zoom call equivalent. And we kind of go around the world. Here's what's going on around the world. And we'd cover every combat zone. We would cover our liaison officers inside DC and so everybody leaves that 3 times a week, you know exactly what's going on across the world in this environment. And I would, make a comment. Look, you hear the information I'm getting here. I'm making the best decisions I can make based on the information I have. If you're sitting out there in this call and you hear me say something that you know is wrong, key the mic and tell me. And so, you're never too young to be the smartest person in the room. And there were tons of time where there'd be a 23 or 24-year-old who would take the risk and key the mic and say, hey, boss, I think you may not have had this piece of intelligence. And I would always go and encourage them to bring that up. So think about culture, think about how you foster communication in your organization, because maintaining alignment is hard to do, particularly as you scale. It's very cool, I think, when if you have 7 or 8 engineers crashing on a product and you get this sense of urgency and you're building it. But then you grow a little bit, you hire a human resources manager, you hire a general counsel, You've got some business development folks. You got lobbyists in DC. How do you keep that group aligned and moving in the same direction? So spend a lot of time thinking about that because it matters.
Yeah, we talked to a couple of your former subordinates, and like one of the things they talk about is just kind of this listening, understanding the other side first before kind of like making decisions, which kind of translates to kind of empathy and understanding the customer. Talk about that, the story with the well.
Yeah.
I think that was pretty cool.
So when you look at a problem, you develop a perspective. It's only one perspective. There are lots of ways to look at problems. And this is the story Paul's referring to happened back in Afghanistan. In the early counterinsurgency days, the task was, hey, let's go help beef up the villages and make them stable. They can stand on their own. Can we build schools? Can we dig wells? How can we help these communities in Afghanistan to make them more self-reliant, resilient? And so we had one team in a village, and they noted that every day the ladies in the village had to walk about 2 hours to go out and get the water. And they're carrying these clay pots, walking about an hour or so, hour and a half, filling up the water and bringing it back every day. And so, of course, the answer was, let's dig them a well. Think of the time we can save and help this village out. And so we did. We dug a well, brought water in, and made the village more self-sufficient. What we didn't understand, though, culturally and not having the right perspective, was that was the only time the ladies in that village were able to talk to one another. Because culturally, they're in their compounds with their families looking about every day. And so we denied the ladies of that village the ability to talk and commiserate and kind of share some of the issues they're dealing with. So again, there's always other perspectives. You have to take the time to develop those. Whenever my staff would come to me and say, hey, we got to do this. These guys are out to get us. I'm like, well, what's their perspective? How would they describe this problem? Because they're not bad Americans. They just have a different perspective on it. So I'll always take the time to kind of think about what other views you might have of the problem.
Mm-hmm. That empathy piece is so important in company building as well. It's not just, let me build this product in my room without talking to customers, figuring out, does this actually solve market need, actually solve a problem? Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Joe, why don't you wrap us up?
Hey, so this is a tech-focused crowd. Technology is important, but Scott said it best. He talked about the soft truths, people and quality. It matters, and not just in the military. It's in all organizations. I think JSOC's amazing. It's got the best toys, the best tech, but it's really about the people. I remember General McChrystal's, the saying, he built the space shuttle in flight in Iraq. And he didn't do it with technology, he built it on people across all the services, across the interagency. I remember another saying, I can commiserate with Scott. Remember he said, decentralized to the point of discomfort. Yeah. You can only do that if you have amazing people, committed, who know the mission, who are focused, who can adapt, overcome, improvise, and execute without being told what to do all the time. That's not just the 3-star level, with all due respect.
Absolutely.
It goes down to lower levels. And we have some future General Howells, General McChrystal's, and is in a room today. I'm not going to bust anything out here, but some are still serving. Thank you. Not going to close cover.
Good work, Pete.
And others here too. So, and even below that in the rank system, I would say some people say America's secret weapon, and you folks in the military understand this, is our non-commissioned officer corps. I mean, I've served in a lot of different countries. No other nation that I know of gives the kind of responsibility and training and investment as we do in our non-commissioned officers and below. And that's our secret weapon. That just goes to the soft truth of investing in people. And I think it translates to Silicon Valley. Remember Trey Stevens last week? What was the name of his fund? Founders Fund. Why wasn't it a technology fund? You got the genesis of that name, right? They invest in founders, they invest in people, they invest in teams. And Trey's done pretty well. He got called by Cincinnati Bengals to see if they want to name the stadium after him. You kind of have to be in a special category of people to call it that. So investing in people, it works, in the military and in the civilian sector. You read the book, General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. I mean, it's amazing what a team of teams can do. I mean, the ops tempo in Iraq, and Scott, you served it. It was like a couple missions a night. I forget what it was, that find, fix, finish.
13, 14, 15.
It was just boom, 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 and never stopped. It could only happen with quality people, good teams, well led. We talked about Somalia today, great Americans. Do you know the names Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon? Medal of Honor winners, the ones that went in and defended that helicopter. Well, there's other people like that. I mean, I think it was Admiral Nimitz who said it, that I think when they opened up the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, speaking on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. And that's the way it is, not just in JSOC, but in a lot of our military units. So we're just really fortunate to have it. We're really blessed to have people like that. So I think we're blessed to have senior leaders like Scott, and also to live in a country where a small town kid from Kentucky with a 1.47 GPA can be given, not handed to, but given the opportunity to bounce back, work hard, and rise to the most senior levels of the military. And that says something about America, and we love it. So Scott, thanks for all you've done for all of us. Thanks for joining us tonight, and thank all of you for coming.
Thank you.